Joining us now on POTUS is Rina Shah. Rina Shah is a senior advisor for Our Republican Legacy. She has just been named to that position as a senior advisor. You will find her at Rina in D.C. if you look on the X. Rina Shah, welcome. Thanks for being on POTUS today.
Hey, happy to be here with you all. Thank you for having me.
So how did you come to be a part of the Our Republican Legacy organization?
Well, this was one of those things that just jumps in front of you in life, and you say to yourself, I've either found my people or I haven't. And it was really obvious to me that this was a group of people I've been looking for a long time. I considered myself politically homeless, essentially, since I did this big thing in 2016 before the Republican National Convention, when Trump was just the presumptive nominee at that point. I was the first elected delegate to publicly speak out against him, and I did so on Fox News. And when I did that, I triggered the far right. And that was an interesting moment in my life because I would, at that point, was considered a younger Republican. I was very much involved in the party, a foot soldier for my local party, serving on the executive committee. And I had my own people come after me and ruin me, essentially, try to take me down for simply just voicing my concerns about how Trump was not a conservative. I didn't think he needed to be on the ballot in the fall, and we could still prevent his nomination on the floor, even though he was on track to win more primaries. So that was a really turning point for me, the pivot point at which I realized something's happening to the party, and it wasn't around the core values. It was around a person. And that's what I think precisely became the problem, and we've seen it over 9 years. It's the not choosing people over politics. And that's always troubled me. And so when I found out what Our Republican Legacy was doing, I just had to be a part of it, because what we're doing is uniting people around these core values, the core principles that are really simple. And there's just 5 of them: unity, the Constitution, fiscal responsibility, free enterprise, and peace through strength. And so that's really it. That's what we're advocating for here. And I said, I got to be a part of this, because nowhere in my last almost decade of being really concerned about the future of the Republican Party has anybody else been talking about just unity through these values.
I wonder, Rina Shah, with us, Our Republican Legacy, which was founded by John Danforth, William Cohen, and the late Alan Simpson, all former U.S. senators, and all who were, I think, pretty much respected for their bipartisanship. Bill Cohen, of course, had served as a senator from Maine, then he wound up being Secretary of Defense. The late Alan Simpson was part of the Simpson-Bowles Commission under President Obama. John Danforth, who was a good friend to George H.W. Bush, Missouri senator. So, but that Republican Party, it seems, and I think about it, Rina, in this term, Democrats talk about how they were the party of the working class and they got to get it back, and Republicans talk about the party that it used to be. But I wonder if those parties even exist anymore, or if it's just people who are looking for some place.
Yeah, there are a lot of politically homeless folks out there who have been afraid to use the word Republican, or when they say that they're Republicans, they feel like they have to couch it in a lot of sort of statements that say, hey, but I'm not part of this nastiness, for example. And when I think back to what former Senator Danforth did in his career and the people around him, what they did, they were just dedicating themselves every day in lawmaking to serious solutions-oriented governing, like the stuff that was, again, talking about how we were going to have restraint at the federal level when it came to spending. You never hear about that anymore because we're in a new era. But I think it's still possible. And even though the party has faced these challenges, I think that many Americans are out there are hungry for a conversation, and beyond a conversation, actually, for groups that want to reclaim those roots of this party in like I just said, serious solutions-oriented governing, which is grounded in the principles I just talked about. And for example, you're not going to hear us talk about a very important issue, a very touchy issue, for example, abortion. It's not one of our core unifying principles, because what we're trying to do is bring people together around what we can agree on. And that kind of issue simply is just going to have a lot of people who disagree on that. But it doesn't mean diversity of thought isn't there. And so when you look at kind of, for example, how we as a party talk about our national security posture that promotes global stability. That whole conversation is far different than the era of the men you just talked about. Those guys were great, again, I think, in a way that was very simple for me. I've studied Senator Danforth, and I'm always having a pinch me moment to think that I'm part of this effort that he had the foresight to think of. And at this stage in his life, he's dedicated himself to saying we can foster a party that bridges divides and we can welcome these diverse voices. So we just need to rededicate ourselves to the Constitution, because that's that guiding framework that allows us to talk about how we uphold the rule of law and promote democratic institutions. So the door right here, right now, where we sit, because of the foundation those people laid back then, like I just said, very simple. The door is always open to remake the Republican Party, and now more than before, because if we talk about the future and we look over the horizon, which we all should be doing, there's an election in 2028, and Trump won't be on that ballot. And I'm just going to be very clear about this. The door, again, is wide open to remake the Republican Party if we support leaders who are dedicated to those 5 core principles I talked about.
Rina Shah, Senior Advisor, Our Republican Legacy. You used the word solutions, and I'm interested in thinking about that, because solutions had been at one point, let's get as much of what we want as we can get. Now it seems to be, get me what I want. And in that sense, there is a turn toward autocracy, not just in this country, but in other places, because of the inefficiency of this process. We talked about the democratic institutions, Democrat small d, that are outlined in the Constitution, because of the fact that they're supposed to work together. And what comes out a lot of times is not a big, beautiful bill, a kind of an ugly bill, but an ugly bill that at least has bipartisan support. So it just seems that culturally we are moving away from that sense of compromise, and I'm not sure how you go about getting that back.
I think the conversation needs to be there, and that's why this effort can be, like I just mentioned over and over. I want to be so clear about it, because it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be complex, and it just has to speak to the people who feel like they haven't been spoken to in a long time about just pragmatic solutions, right? And it's advocating. What we're doing is advocating for the change that a lot of Americans want, but they don't want extremism. When we talk about, Trump's win in 2024, it was decisive. He swept the swing states and the electoral vote. But I think the long-term success for the party means building on sustainable principles, not just immediate victories. And we're seeing opportunities to address challenges like foreign policy or economic priorities through the lens of the principles I mentioned, which are fiscal responsibility, the Constitution, free enterprise. These are all essential for global leadership. And what we're trying to do with our Republican legacy that I think is very possible, and what people already, within a day of my announcement of joining the group, people are saying, I think you can offer an alternative. I said, well, that's exactly why we need a new organization to say, you don't have to leave the party. You don't even have to really always keep saying that I'm a Republican, but you have to say, I want to be with a political party that is committed to being strong on national security without isolationism, for example. You got to say, I want to foster a group of lawmakers that believes in being fiscally responsible without unnecessary division. And we see small glimmers of hope in Congress, but they're not enough. And so we have to keep welcoming these diverse voices while upholding Republican roots. And in that, we can still be the party of Lincoln. I really believe that. It's just about having the conversation. And right now, it feels like the moment is kind of gone. But I implore people to think about it this way. It's not. Because the minute you start having a conversation, you can find common ground, and you can find people who are with you in the fight.
Rina Shah, I appreciate you spending time with us on POTUS today. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me here, Tim.
Rina Shah, Senior Advisor for Our Republican Legacy. You can find her at Rina in D.C., RINAINDC. Grace Seeger standing by, staff writer for the New Republic.